Barron Trump muttered, "Go back to Africa," under his breath. But what Jasmine Crockett said in response left the entire room in shock, and America watching. But that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building quietly, steadily from the moment she walked into the studio. Jasmine Crockett had done this kind of panel before plenty of times, in rooms colder than they looked, under lights too bright to ignore, with cameras that turned people into characters instead of humans. She knew what this was. Not a conversation, not really. A performance. A televised roundtable on federal education policy, filmed in a DC studio dressed up to look like Middle America wood grain desk, library backdrop, and a polite anchor whose tie changed with the polling season. She'd prepped, of course, read the newest numbers on school funding gaps, memorized the line item differences between two versions of a bill no one watching would ever read. She knew the real test wouldn't come from questions, it would come from interruptions, innuendos, and the pressure to break. Still, nothing in the call sheet mentioned Barron Trump. His name wasn't in the lineup when her team reviewed the guest list. But there he was, standing just off stage, tall in a fitted navy suit and white sneakers, hairstyled like someone had spent time trying to make it look effortless. The son of a former president turned media darling of the new right, now rebranded as a youth advocate. His platform was built on discipline, accountability, and respect, words that too often came with hidden translations. Jasmine didn't flinch when she saw him. She didn't blink, just adjusted the lapel of her blazer and took a slow breath. You learn not to show surprise when the room shifts. Producers buzzed around them, adjusting mic packs, checking sound levels. Barron chuckled at something a staffer whispered in his ear, the kind of laugh that doesn't come from humor but from comfort. Like he knew this was his home field. Jasmine didn't care. She didn't come to spar. She came to speak, the kind of speaking that doesn't play to the camera but slices through it. She looked once more at her notes, just headlines now, reminders, and then set them down. She wasn't worried about what he'd say. She was thinking about how many young girls were going to be watching this, and how they'd remember what grace looks like when it's backed by fire. The lights dimmed. The countdown started. 5, 4, 3. The lower third on the screen read, "Education Nation, the future of American classrooms." It looked neutral enough, like every other headline that pretended politics could be tidy. But the matchup was anything but. Within seconds of the broadcast starting, social media lit up, not about policy, not about spending bills, but about the pairing. Barron Trump and Jasmine Crockett, who signed off on this? The panel was 3 guests deep, but it was clear from the start who the audience came to see. Barron leaned back in his chair with practiced ease, one leg crossed, jaw tilted at just the right angle. He flashed confident half-smiles after every sentence, speaking in clipped phrases that sounded rehearsed but polished. He interrupted gently, always just enough to assert control, never enough to seem hostile. He was raised in rooms like this. It showed. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett sat with her spine straight and her hands still, fingers laced atop a notepad she hadn't touched. She wasn't here to react. She was here to witness, to document, to wait. Barron talked about standards, competition, and how everyone needs to be held to the same bar. Jasmine didn't respond right away. She studied him, let him fill the space. When she finally spoke, it was low, measured, and sharp enough to cut through the fluff. "So just to be clear," she said, voice smooth as glass, "you're suggesting students in underfunded districts simply need to try harder?" Barron smiled, like someone had just offered him a softball. "I'm saying we need accountability," he replied. "We can't keep making excuses for failure." His words weren't loud, but they landed like slaps. He knew how to say things without saying them. He knew the code. Jasmine knew it too. The moderator tried to pivot, but the current had shifted. The temperature dropped by 2 degrees. Jasmine didn't argue. She didn't rise. She just leaned forward slightly, eyes calm, tone unchanged. "There's a difference," she said, "between making excuses and telling the truth." Barron blinked. The audience watching from living rooms, phones, classrooms, they noticed the moment. Not because it was dramatic, because it was exact. This wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning in disguise. They eased into the topic like it was neutral ground: student loan reform, rising interest rates, the economic strain on recent graduates. It was supposed to be a safe segment. Numbers, charts, and polite disagreement. But safe never lasts long when the power in the room is uneven. Barron jumped in first. "We've created a culture where people think education comes without sacrifice," he said, gesturing with one hand like a professor before tenure. If you borrow, you pay it back. That's basic responsibility. Jasmine listened, not just to the words, but to the rhythm behind them, the calm certainty of someone convinced their experience is the baseline. The moderator nodded along, inviting more. Barron took the cue. It's not about the system, he continued. It's about mindset, entitlement culture. We've got people majoring in poetry and wondering why they can't buy a house. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. The room already knew who that message was aimed at. Jasmine raised her eyebrows slightly but didn't interrupt. She let him finish. She always let them finish. When the moderator finally turned to her, she didn't rush. Let me be clear, she said, voice steady. Student debt isn't just about choices. It's about context. About black and brown students disproportionately borrowing more because generational wealth gaps force them to. It's about schools and neighborhoods where guidance counselors are outnumbered by broken desks. It's about survival, not entitlement. Barron opened his mouth, ready to interject. She didn't stop. And for the record, she added, education isn't a luxury. It's a promise this country made and then rigged. The silence was sharp, not because it was loud, but because it was earned. Barron gave a soft laugh, the kind that didn't need to sound amused. There it is, he said. Always someone else's fault. Jasmine didn't flinch. No, she replied. It's always everyone else's burden until we decide to fix it. The moderator shifted in his seat. The cameras kept rolling. But something underneath the table had already snapped. The panel wasn't a discussion anymore. It was a warning waiting to detonate. They cut to commercial. Studio assistants swarmed in with fresh water. Someone repowdered Barron's forehead. Another tried to adjust Jasmine's mic, which didn't need adjusting. The host smiled, tight-lipped into nothing. It was just another break, the kind that never really pauses anything. Barron leaned back in his chair, rolled his neck, glanced toward the shadows off camera where his aide was tapping at a phone. Then, under his breath, just loud enough to be caught, not loud enough to be brave, he muttered. She should just go back to Africa. It was casual, offhand, like flicking lint off a sleeve. He didn't know the mic was still on. Didn't see the red light blinking quietly on the edge of his lapel. Didn't realize a tech in the control room had been recording the raw feed for archival standard practice, and that his headset buzzed as the words came through like a slap across glass. Jasmine heard it. Not immediately, not with full clarity. But she caught enough. Enough to freeze. Enough to pause her reach for the water bottle. She didn't turn her head. She didn't ask for confirmation. She just breathed ounces low, deliberate. Someone across the room, a black camera operator named Malik, stood a little straighter behind his rig. The host's assistant blinked, lips parting slightly, eyes darting to the sound tech, who was now holding a headset in disbelief. And in the control room, a young producer with a side braid and chipped blue nail polish rewound the last 10 seconds, replayed it again. She should just go back to Africa. They clipped it. Within minutes, someone leaked it. 15 seconds of audio, a camera angled slightly off-center, a voice that didn't sound angry, just entitled, just certain he could say it and nothing would happen. But something did. By the time the show resumed, phones were already buzzing, group chats were already lit, hashtags already spinning. Jasmine sat there like nothing had changed. But everything had. Not because she'd been insulted, but because everyone else had just heard what she's heard her whole life, spoken with a mic on and a mask off. It took a moment for the words to land. At first, the silence wasn't about shock, it was about uncertainty. Did he really say that? Did we hear it right? Everyone in the studio suddenly became aware of their own breathing. The hum of the lights felt louder. The desk between them might as well have been an ocean. The moderator glanced to his left, to his producers just off camera. His fingers twitched nervously, looking for a cue. The teleprompter kept scrolling like nothing had happened. But his face was already losing its composure, darting, lips pressed together like he knew this was no longer a panel. It was a moment. A problem. Barron sat back like he'd just taken a sip of something cold, relaxed, detached. Either he didn't know what the mic picked up, or worse, he did, and didn't care. He didn't look at Jasmine. Didn't apologize, didn't clarify. He just adjusted his cufflink and looked toward the host like the segment was still his. Jasmine sat still. Not frozen, not stunned, just still. Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of her notepad, but her face didn't change. She didn't glance at Barron, didn't turn toward the camera. She just let the weight of the silence stretch. Let it linger, because sometimes silence is louder than outrage. Someone in the back dropped a pen. A producer whispered something that didn't quite carry. A sound tech half raised his hand, then let it fall. Everyone was waiting for the host to say something. To fix it. To smooth it over. But he didn't. So the show went on. The moderator's voice cracked as he welcomed them back from commercial. He didn't reference what happened, just picked up the next topic like it hadn't happened. Let's pivot to infrastructure funding and education, he said, his tone brittle. Barron nodded quickly. Jasmine didn't. She wasn't ignoring him. She was remembering. Because when someone tells you to leave the country you were born in, raised in, fought for on live TV, with a smile behind it, what do? You don't flinch. You let them hear the echo of their own words. And then you let the country decide what to do with it. By the time the panel ended, the clip had already traveled further than the broadcast. Someone in the control room leaked it 15 seconds of raw studio footage. No edits, no overlays. Just Barron Trump's voice, clear as daylight, saying words no mic was supposed to catch. She should just go back to Africa. The first upload hit Twitter at 11:47 a.m. Eastern. Captioned simply, "He really said this." On a hot mic. Within 10 minutes, the post had over 0 retweets. Within 30, it had become a firestorm. The audio was clipped, stitched, slowed down, replayed. People captioned it with disbelief, fury, exhaustion. Others tried to defend it, call it a misquote, a misunderstanding, a smear. But the clip didn't lie. It was the tone that made it undeniable. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't flustered. It was calm. Like he'd said it before, like he believed it. Commentators hit the airwaves. Talk radio hosts ran emergency call-ins. On Instagram, influencers paused their sponsorships to talk about it. TikTok exploded with reaction video teachers, veterans, college students, Black mothers reading the caption aloud and shaking their heads. "Go back to Africa" started trending by lunchtime, but not the way Barron's defenders expected. It was used with irony, grief, anger. Women posted photos of their families with captions like, "My great-grandfather bled in Normandy, but I should go back? We built this place. What do you mean go back?" Celebrities weighed in. A Grammy winner tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett is America. Barron's the echo of everything we pretend we've outgrown." A former president posted a rare message. The mic caught more than a voice. It caught a mindset. Meanwhile, Jasmine remained silent. No tweets, no press statements, no rebuttals. Just a photo posted by someone else of her walking out of the studio, back straight, head high. Because when you've been told to leave a place you already belong to, and you stay anyway, that's not defiance, that's ownership. And America? It was listening, whether it liked what it heard or not. It took less than 6 hours for Barron Trump to say something. Not in person, not in a press conference, not even through a spokesperson. Just a tweet. No apology, no clarity. Just a carefully worded shrug disguised as strength. We live in a world where everything you say is twisted. Stay focused. Stay real. 7 words. Vague enough to dodge. Arrogant enough to provoke. He didn't mention Jasmine. He didn't mention the words. But everyone knew exactly what he was doing, dismissing without addressing. Turning the insult into a defense. By nightfall, his team followed up with a generic press statement released to a friendly outlet. Mr. Trump believes strongly in free speech and civil discourse. Any attempts to mischaracterize his comments take them grossly out of context. He looks forward to continuing the conversation on education reform. Grossly out of context. The words echoed across cable news segments like a bad chorus. Right-wing media moved fast. They framed the moment as a manufactured outrage, a witch hunt, another example of cancel culture run wild. One anchor smirked into the camera and said, "So now you can't even mutter anything without being called a racist?" They showed split screens. Jasmine frozen and calm, Barron brushing off the controversy with polished deflection. Their audience clapped for him, called him brave, claimed he was being targeted. But on the other side of the political aisle, the tone was sharp. Commentators didn't mince words. A Black congresswoman tweeted, "He didn't just say the quiet part loud, he said it proud. And that's the real story." A civil rights lawyer posted, "This wasn't a gaffe. This was a glimpse." Still, even with voices rising from every direction, defenders and critics, allies and detractors, the one voice people were waiting for remained quiet. Jasmine Crockett hadn't said a word. And the silence? It was louder than anything Barron had posted. While pundits spun takes and Barron doubled down, Jasmine Crockett disappeared, at least from the screens. No cable hits, no tweets, no angry press tour. Instead, she was photographed walking through her district in South Dallas. She wore a denim jacket and flat shoes, hair pulled back, clipboard in hand. No cameras followed her. Just kids who ran up to hug her outside a rec center and teachers who stopped to shake her hand. She visited a charter school in Oak Cliff and sat with a group of fifth graders working on a poetry project. She read their lines, nodded thoughtfully, and asked questions like it mattered, because to her, it did. A local reporter snapped a blurry shot of her kneeling to tie a little girl's shoelace, captioned simply, "No press conference, no hashtags, just presence." The networks kept asking when she'd respond. A CNN anchor leaned forward during a live broadcast and said, "You have to wonder what she's thinking." Twitter filled the silence with speculation. She's waiting for the perfect moment. She's planning something major. Maybe she's just tired. But Jasmine didn't feed the narrative. She didn't perform for it. Because this wasn't about content, it was about character. A reporter from a local station caught her leaving a school and asked, "Do you plan to respond to Mr. Trump's comment?" Jasmine paused, smiled gently, and said, "Not yet." That was it. But it was enough to keep the country watching. She wasn't hiding, she was building. And sometimes, silence isn't retreat, it's resistance. Because when you know your worth, you don't race to explain it. You just show up, again and again, until the noise burns itself out and the truth walks in. By the next morning, the backlash had crystallized, but not against Barron. Conservative media wasted no time flipping the narrative. They didn't defend what he said, they denied it was ever said at all. She misheard him, one host insisted. It was background noise. Another pundit leaned into the camera with a smirk and said, "He's being crucified for something no one can even prove." Victimhood had a new face. Barron's articles flooded the usual platforms. Cancel culture targets Barron Trump. One hot mic versus a promising future. Young conservatives silenced for speaking his mind. They turned the insult into a conspiracy, a trap, a witch hunt. A few even floated theories that the audio was doctored. None of it stuck, but it didn't have to. They weren't trying to convince, they were trying to divide. And it worked. The battle lines drew fast. Online, on air, in family group chats that suddenly went silent. One side framed it as a mistake, exaggerated for clicks. The other knew it wasn't a mistake at all, it was a mirror. One that America kept breaking every time it showed too much truth. But while political machines spun their usual gears, something quieter was happening in classrooms. A civics teacher in Atlanta rewrote her Thursday lesson plan. Instead of covering federalism, she played the clip. Asked her 10th graders what they heard, what they felt. Some shrugged. Some sat up straighter. One student said, "He didn't even say it angry. That's what made it worse." Parents across the country started conversations at dinner tables they'd avoided for years. Not just about race, but about identity, history, belonging. Civil rights groups issued joint statements demanding consequences, real ones. Not canned apologies, not PR tours. They called for accountability, for media responsibility, for Barron to face his own words without spin. But Jasmine? Still quiet, still working, still moving forward. Because the noise was never new to her. It just finally had subtitles. That night, Jasmine Crockett sat on the edge of her hotel bed, shoes off, blazer folded neatly beside her. The television was on but muted. News segments replayed her face, her stillness, the clip, but she didn't look at the screen. She was watching the wall, somewhere between here and memory. Because this wasn't the first time. She was 12, the first time someone told her to go back somewhere. A substitute teacher who didn't like her tone when she corrected a history slide. Jasmine had said, "That's not what Dr. King meant." The teacher replied, "You people always have something to say." In law school, a professor once called her a little too passionate for courtroom decorum when she questioned a sentencing disparity. She'd smiled then too, same kind of stillness, same burn underneath. And in Congress, it came coat-addressed in compliments that weren't really compliments at all. "You're very articulate. You've come a long way. Just don't be so emotional." She wasn't surprised by Barron's words, just tired. Her mother had flown in earlier that evening, unannounced but expected. She always showed up when things got heavy. They'd eaten takeout on the small hotel table. Jasmine barely touched hers. Her mother didn't push. Now, the room was quiet except for the hum of the city outside. Jasmine finally looked at her mother and said, "You heard what he said?" Her mother nodded once, not with anger, with memory. "I've heard it 100 ways in my life," she said, her voice soft. "But I taught you what my mother taught me. Dignity doesn't flinch." Jasmine looked down at her hands. "I don't want to be quiet forever." "You're not quiet," her mother replied. "You're waiting for your moment to speak in a way they can't ignore. And when you do make it count." Jasmine nodded. Because this wasn't about one insult. It was about every insult that never made it to a microphone. And now that it had, she was going to make sure the whole country heard it. It started with a simple tweet. No fancy graphics, no press release font. Just black text on a white background, posted at 8:12 a.m. "I'll be speaking tomorrow at 11 a.m. from the steps of my high school in South Dallas. That's where this needs to happen." That was it. No explanation, no hashtags, no mention of Barron Trump. But the moment those words went live, the storm shifted direction. Within minutes, newsrooms scrambled. Anchors interrupted mid-segment to announce the update. Producers began coordinating crews to get to Texas. Journalists refreshed their inboxes, hoping for early access, a quote, anything. By noon, 3 national outlets had booked flights. Local news trucks parked outside the gates of South Oak Ridge High, an aging red brick school that hadn't seen this many cameras since desegregation protests in the 70s. She didn't choose Capitol Hill. She didn't choose a Sunday show. She chose home. Reporters speculated. Would she call for resignation? Would she press charges? Would she finally say Barron's name? But Jasmine remained silent. People started driving in. Former classmates, community leaders, teachers, kids who'd only seen her on the news. They brought folding chairs, homemade signs, folding fans for the heat. Some held hands, some just held space. A janitor unlocked the school's front gate early that morning. He remembered Jasmine when she was just that girl always carrying a book and speaking her mind. The school secretary placed a small podium at the top of the stairs. No banners, no staging, just concrete steps, sun-stained windows, and the truth waiting to be said. Back in D.C., Barron's team scrambled. Aides urged him to stay quiet, but he was restless. He kept checking his feed, watching the buildup like a man waiting for a verdict he didn't believe was real. But Jasmine wasn't preparing to indict him. She was preparing to remind the country that some insults don't silence people, they amplify them. And sometimes, you don't speak from a podium to answer a question. You speak to ask a better one. The sun was high, pressing down like truth. People packed the schoolyard, standing on patchy grass and cracked sidewalk. The steps of South Oak Ridge, high, now a national stage. A cluster of microphones waited at the top, bobbing like nervous heads. News crews jockeyed for angles. Phones were already live. But Jasmine took the stairs alone. No entourage, no team behind her. Just a black folder tucked under one arm, a plain navy dress, and the kind of stillness that makes people go quiet without being asked. She stepped up, adjusted the mic once, then paused. No prepared remarks, no teleprompter, just breath. "I was going to read something," she said, voice low but carried. "I brought the folder. I thought I needed it." She held it up, then placed it on the step beside her. "But I don't." Silence, pure and electric. "What happened this week wasn't new," she continued. "Not to me. Not to anyone who's ever been told they didn't belong in a place they helped build." She looked past the cameras, to the crowd, to the kids in school uniforms near the front, to the older women fanning themselves with church bulletins, to the teachers standing shoulder to shoulder with alumni. "I've been told to go back before," she said, "but I'm already home." A pause. "This is home, South Dallas, Texas, America. We built this place too. We bled for it. We taught in it. We marched through it. We raised children on its sidewalks and buried parents in its soil. So when someone says, 'Go back,' I ask them, back to what? Back to who?" The crowd was silent, but the energy pulsed. She didn't yell. She didn't rise. She stood grounded, like someone with roots deeper than insult. "Belonging," she said, "is not a matter of who's most comfortable in the room. It's about who has earned the right to speak, and I have." One of the mics crackled with the wind. She didn't flinch. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to remind people watching that black women don't need permission to stand where we stand." A breeze caught the hem of her dress. And in that moment, the insult that tried to erase her had turned into something else entirely. Proof that she'd never needed to be invited to speak. She'd always had the floor. By the time Jasmine stepped down from the school steps, the speech had already started traveling. It wasn't just reposted, it was absorbed, played in classrooms, paused in living rooms, quoted in office Slack threads, played again in a backroom barbershop in Detroit where someone muttered, "She said that with her whole chest." News anchors dropped their polished summaries and just played the clip. Full, uncut. One by one, they stopped explaining what happened and let her voice carry its own weight. The moment hit because it wasn't a performance. It was permission. We don't go back. We build forward. The line became a refrain, printed on protest signs, tweeted above photos of grandmothers at immigration hearings, scrawled on a chalkboard in a middle school civics class in Tulsa. A librarian in Portland printed it above the biography section, tucked between Maya Angelou and Angela Davis. Students across the country started debates not just about racism, but about what it means to belong. One senior in Chicago told her teacher, "I've never heard someone sound like my mom and a congresswoman at the same time." A group of Navy vets rewound the clip during a meeting in Pensacola. One said, "That's what standing looks like when you've got more than rank behind you." In Birmingham, a Sunday sermon opened with Jasmine's words. In Sacramento, a mother quoted them during a school board meeting. In El Paso, a young girl added the quote to her class essay. "We build forward because we belong here, no matter who doubts it." The clip crossed political lines, geographic borders, generations. Because it wasn't about one comment anymore. It was about the exhaustion of defending your presence in a place you helped build, the right to speak without shrinking, the courage to answer hate without mimicry. Jasmine didn't just go viral. She ignited something people had been holding in their mouths for too long. And finally, they said it out loud. Barron Trump didn't tweet the next day, or the day after that. His team canceled 2 scheduled interviews, one with a cable news anchor known for softball questions, another with a podcast that had already pre-written the intro. The official word was schedule conflicts. But everyone knew better. Behind closed doors, his allies began calculating distance. Donors who once praised his fresh perspective went quiet. A political strategist was overheard in a D.C. steakhouse saying, "He's radioactive for now, maybe permanently." Major universities began pulling back. Georgetown quietly removed his name from an upcoming youth summit. NYU canceled a panel where he was set to discuss civic engagement in a divided nation. One dean emailed staff saying simply, "Our students deserve better." The ripple wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. Invitations dried up. Speaking engagements disappeared. Even friendly outlets started using phrases like tone-deaf and unseasoned. His base stayed loyal, of course. Online forums buzzed with defenses, conspiracy theories, videos clipped to erase context. They called Jasmine everything from manipulative to opportunistic. But outside the echo chamber, Barron's image had shifted, permanently. He'd crossed from promising young voice to cautionary tale in the span of a soundbite. And the part that shook his team most? Jasmine never said his name. Not once. She didn't ask for punishment, didn't beg for consequence. She just told the truth. And let the consequences find him anyway. The impact didn't stop at headlines. It reached deeper into the fabric of how America talks about power, race, and the price of showing up in the room unapologetically. News programs pivoted. Segments once filled with pundit bickering were suddenly revisiting old footage. Those clipped moments when black women were cut off mid-sentence, dismissed with a smile, called hostile for raising a brow. Clips of Congresswoman Maxine Waters being told to calm down. Kamala Harris being talked over in debates. Ayanna Pressley being labeled radical for asking about justice. Now, the language had a name. The pattern had a reference point. Jasmine Crockett had become more than a person, she'd become a mirror. Journalists began calling it what it was. Not a slip, not a misunderstanding. A systemic reflex older than microphones, sharper than policy. And people couldn't stop seeing it. More black women in leadership began stepping forward. One state legislator in Georgia tweeted, "We've all heard it." Not always in those words, but in that tone. A city councilwoman in Oakland gave a speech echoing Jasmine's cadence, ending with, "We are not guests here, we are the foundation." Community organizations started sharing the speech at workshops. Educators built discussion guides around it. High school teachers paused curriculum plans to play the full clip, not just the viral excerpt. One posted on Reddit, "I didn't teach government today, I taught presence." In St. Paul, a Black history class spent a week on the speech not to analyze the insult, but to explore the response. A student raised her hand and said, "She didn't call him out. She called us in." In Houston, a 5th grade teacher wrote Jasmine's words on the whiteboard, "We don't go back. We build forward." Students wrote what they wanted to build. respect, space, voice, home. The conversation had changed. Not because the insult was new, but because this time someone had caught it in real time, stood still, and refused to flinch. And that kind of clarity? It doesn't fade. It spreads. Jasmine sat in her office after hours, the hallway dark except for a sliver of light slipping in from the city. Her inbox was flooded, thousands of emails, DMs, handwritten letters, scanned and sent by staff. Some angry, some tearful, all of them raw. She tried to read a few each night, not for flattery, for grounding. One message stood out, from a girl named Alana, age 11, Wichita, Kansas. "They told me I didn't belong," it read in neat digital cursive. "But you said I do. So next time someone says I'm too loud, I'll remember you didn't yell, you just stood there." Jasmine exhaled. Saved the message. Typed back one line. "You belong, loud or quiet." Another came from a white mother in Boise, Idaho. No emojis, no hashtags, just honesty. "My son heard the comment on TV and didn't understand why it was wrong. Your response helped me explain it. Thank you for giving me words I didn't have before." It was the kind of message that stung and soothed at once. The reminder that clarity wasn't just for the people who looked like hair, it was for the ones who needed to unlearn what they'd inherited. There were more. A note from a veteran who said he'd heard worse in the military but never saw it answered with such grace. A grandmother who said she printed out the speech and read it aloud at Sunday dinner. And buried in a pile was a hand-drawn picture stick figures on the steps of a school. One wore a dress. The caption scribbled in pencil, "She stands for us." Jasmine didn't post about the messages, didn't make a thread, she just kept them. Because this wasn't about going viral. It was about what the quiet moments carried. Proof that a single truth spoken plainly, without apology, could echo long after the cameras stopped rolling. And give people not just something to react to, but something to hold. The surprise didn't come from the expected corners. Progressive leaders had already spoken. Activists had marched. Educators had responded. But when the condemnation came from people inside Barron Trump's own orbit, something shifted. It started with a retired Marine Corps general, not one for headlines, not known for culture war takes. He posted a short statement on LinkedIn, where he usually shared updates on veterans' initiatives. "My grandfather fought in Europe. My father fought in Vietnam. My sister teaches in a public school in South Carolina." Telling someone to go back because they challenge you isn't just wrong. It's un-American. This isn't about politics. This is about what we're becoming. It went viral within the hour. Then came a pastor from Birmingham, a lifelong conservative who once delivered an invocation at a Republican National Convention. His Sunday sermon was broadcast live, but it wasn't about scripture this time. It was about tone, about how Jesus didn't flinch when mocked, about how courage doesn't always shout. Jasmine Crockett didn't yell, he said to a packed congregation. She didn't smear, she stood. And if that unsettles us, maybe we should ask why. His words were shared on Christian radio across 3 states. A former Bush administration staffer wrote an op-ed in the Dallas Morning News. The headline read, "I disagree with Jasmine Crockett on policy, but I stand with her on principle." More followed. Quietly, but with conviction. Even conservative youth leaders, once quick to repost Barron's clips, began backing away. A few deleted their tweets. One posted, "Respect has to be more than a slogan, otherwise we're just branding intolerance." It didn't collapse the right-wing defense of Barron, but it cracked it. Because some things don't need partisanship, they just need conscience. And while Jasmine never asked for defenders, they came anyway from pews, from uniforms, from places where politics used to stop at decency's edge. She arrived at Union Station early on a Monday. No press, no welcome party, just a black tote bag slung over one shoulder and her usual slow, measured pace. Back in Washington, the buzz hadn't died down, but she'd tuned it out. No interviews, no roundtables, no moment of the week montages. Just her seat in Congress, her legislation, her district, her name on the roll call. The Capitol looked the same, high arches, long echoes, but it felt different. Staffers glanced up when she walked past. Not out of awe, out of recognition. They'd seen her hold a room without raising her voice. And now, every step she took down the marble hallway felt heavier, more permanent. Her office door bore the same brass plate. But inside, the energy was sharper, clearer, like something had settled that didn't need explanation anymore. She sat at her desk, flipped through policy briefs, signed off on a bill supporting underfunded rural schools. No statements, No subtle digs, just the work. Later that afternoon, in the hallway between committee rooms, a senior Republican congressman from Montana, gray-haired, known for staying out of culture, wore past her without a smile. But as he walked by, he said quietly, "That was leadership." He didn't wait for a reply. And Jasmine didn't offer one. Because she didn't need to. The echo of her words had already reached the places that mattered. And now, she was right where she'd always intended to be. Not viral. Not vindicated. Just at work. It didn't come with fanfare. No press conference. No podium flanked by flags. Just a line added to the congressional docket one quiet Wednesday morning. H.R. 8426, the Educational Equity Infrastructure Act. Sponsor, Rep. Jasmine Crockett, TX30. The bill was clean, focused, unapologetically ambitious. Targeted funding for schools in long-ignored districts. Modernized facilities. Access to broadband. Federal matching funds for states that reduced racial funding gaps. No buzzwords, just results. Her office didn't announce it with a flourish. They just submitted it and got back to work. But word spread anyway. Advocacy groups picked it up. Educators applauded the scope. A superintendent in Detroit called it the blueprint we've been waiting for. A teacher in Mississippi tweeted, "She didn't just speak, she built something." And then came the surprise. Barron Trump signed on as a co-sponsor. No statement, no tweet, no interviews. Just a name added quietly to the list of backers below Crockett's, with no fanfare, no press release, and no spin. Some said it was damage control. Others called it growth. Jasmine called it irrelevant. Not because it didn't matter, but because she didn't need credit for someone else doing the right thing. They never spoke. No handshake, no staged unity photo, no dramatic aisle-crossing moment. Just policy. Just work. Because what happened weeks before didn't vanish. It evolved. Jasmine knew the cameras would want a follow-up, a hug, a headline. But sometimes the real story doesn't come with resolution. It comes with results. And in the halls of Congress, where too many arguments end in nothing, she had pushed something real into motion. Not for applause. For impact. It was a small auditorium inside a middle school in Richmond, Virginia. Fold-out chairs, flickering fluorescents. No national media, just students, teachers. A few parents lingering in the back with crossed arms and curious eyes. Jasmine stood at the front in sneakers and a soft blue blazer, sleeves rolled. No speech, just Q&A. The questions ranged from policy to personal. One boy asked if she ever met Beyoncé. A girl asked what books she liked in 5th grade. Then a student in the third row, brown skin, high ponytail, eyes like fire, raised her hand and asked, "How did you stay so calm when he said that to you?" The room went quiet. Jasmine smiled. Not the kind of smile for cameras, the kind you give when someone sees the whole truth of you in one question. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage and said, "Because power doesn't need to yell." She let that land. Then added, "Softer now. It just needs to stand." The room exhaled. Teachers nodded. A few students clapped, not loud, but long enough to mean something. Later that night, Jasmine sat in her hotel room with her phone face down and the lights dimmed. She wrote one last line in her notebook, not for a tweet, not for a speech, just for herself. If the truth shook you, maybe you needed to be shaken. She closed the cover, sat back, and smiled again. Not because the work was done, but because now, more people were ready to carry it with her. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.